And yesterday we did a worksheet on the Hear My Voice book club. And it was really a powerful, it's actually about a 2-hour worksheet. And I just wrote to her to see if we've got the link yet. And if not, we'll get it as soon as possible and get it put on our YouTube page for anybody that would like to watch it. And what was powerful about it, and this whole reading that Jeannie just did kind of keyed me into it. What was powerful about it was the fact of the situation the woman who volunteered to do the worksheet was in was a major external thing that in her mind was such a disturbance that, it was almost like, this is the end of my happiness because of this external thing that happened. And as we went through the worksheet, she confronted many things that just are reflected in what Michael wrote here. And there's a really powerful passage in A Course in Miracles that, for me, fits with this session that Janie just read from Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. And what this passage says is there is another way of looking at the world. You've made many ideas that you've placed between yourself, and I'm going to edit this just slightly from the Course. You've made many ideas that you've placed between yourself and your experience of yourself as love. And these beliefs are the world as you perceive it. Truth is not absent here, but it is obscure. And how this all ties together for me and becomes, I think, an important lesson as each of us advances in the practice of forgiveness was there were a couple of very distinct points in the worksheet where, one, you could see this woman as she dropped down into her pain, as she allowed herself to really experience the trauma that was happening for her, the trauma that she thought was caused by something happening in her world, something outside of her, something external to her, a circumstance, a situation. And her thinking was that this was, it's like just tragic. And yet, on a couple of occasions, at one point she went into major healing crisis, which reflected in her face. I brought up to her the reflection that I saw, the shift that happened in her. And so there's a visual component to this particular worksheet, if you choose to watch it. And you could see the energy in her face changing and becoming traumatic. And then there came a point where she moved to a thought that for her was delightful. Nothing in the circumstance in the external world had changed. All she did was changed a thought. And literally she moved from this trauma-based face to just, beaming joy and aliveness and delight. Like extreme. And it reminded me of this passage from the Course. no matter what is happening in your world, if you were brought into the world, as most people are, you were brought into a culture with a family system, and by about the age of 4, you likely, as most all of us did, became a carrying member of the One World Universal Church of Blaine. And that the reason there was disturbance in you was not your own thoughts, but rather a circumstance in the world. And that you gave up the ability to tap into truth because the belief, the thought structure was based in a belief that something outside of you was the cause of something moving inside of you. And remember that we call that denial. That's our definition of denial. Whenever I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of what's moving inside of me, I'm in denial. When I'm in denial, I have to dissociate from the real cause of what's going on. I have to hide it from myself, and I have to hide myself from myself. And so it seems as though in the lie of the mind, those thoughts, as this passage speaks of, again it says, you've made many ideas that you place between yourself and your experience of yourself as love. And these beliefs are the world as you perceive it. Truth is not absent here, but is only obscured. What has it been obscured by? It's been obscured by the lie that comes from this game of denial. Denial leading to dissociation. If I believe that a lie, that something outside of me is the cause of my pain, I can't be in touch with me as the presence of love in the presence of that thinking. I mean, the truth is still there. I'm still there. I could at any instant tap into the truth of who I am and beam as the presence of love throughout my whole physiology at any instant. But I've obscured the truth of who I am by these lies, by this fraud. And at any moment that I choose, and I don't know whether, I haven't read Michael's book. He did the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop about, I'm not even sure now, probably 30 years ago. He has a center in the Gainesville area in Florida, and I had been invited to speak there. I presented the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop. But I don't know that he mentions or talks about forgiveness as such. He has many approaches to, getting free from the beliefs of the mind, from the mind itself, from the thought, essentially from the thought disorders. But for me, the technology that Yeshua brings to the table that's missing in the whole Eastern philosophical world is that there is a way that you can consistently and persistently weaken the energy of the lies of the mind. Or, as this particular phrase says from the Course, the many ideas you place between yourself and your experience of yourself as love. And those ideas, those thought disorders, tend to be generational. They tend to be forced on us by power persons when they're in trauma, not out of volition, but out of trauma that was passed on to them generation by generation by generation by generation. The thought comes, and I've spoken about, Jeannie and I have both spoken about this experience before, but one day Jeannie and I were in a grocery store. There was a woman in front of us who had a little boy, probably 2.5 or 3, in her cart, and the little boy wanted some grapes that were in the cart, and a big screaming match ensued. I went out to get the car. Jeannie was checking out, so I went out to get the car and pulled it up in front of the store. The woman that was in front of us pulled off to the side while I headed out to the car, and Jeannie checked out. So Jeannie was standing at the front door when this woman was heading out to her car. And she heard this little boy, 3 or under, and it's mind-boggling. Why should a child of 3 even be able to conceive of such a thought, except that it's a generational pattern? But what she heard, and it touched her pretty deeply. She heard this and then got in the car and was almost in tears. And actually, if you choose to share anything about what was going on for you, Jeannie, instantly called her son as a result of that experience. But this little boy is in a cart, mother's wheeling him out, and what Jeannie hears is, and I'm tying this into this thought of what thoughts do we put in place, put between us and the experience of ourselves as love. And this little guy is saying to his mother as she pushes him out of the cart, "I love you, Mom. Please don't beat me." Now there's a thought disorder that is probably going to plague this boy at the age of 5, at the age of 7, at the age of 10, 15, 18, first love, female, woman, mom, power person, trauma. What kinds of things come between him as experiencing himself as the presence of love that he thinks he has to, tell somebody I love you in order to avoid being beaten? If there's ever a moment when any one of us is in a moment of trauma, what thought have we put between ourselves and the experience of ourselves as love in order to avoid the experience of ourselves as love? What kind of mind energy is held in mind that the mind generates this whole reality, this whole structure called perception based in trauma that separates us from the truth of who we are? And to me, the last sentence in this particular passage is so important and such an inspiration. Because if you're lost in the trauma, the child who knows how many, I can only assume, it would be reasonable to assume, I think, that this child has been beaten by mom, that he would say, "I love you, please don't beat me," and will very likely be beaten again, and maybe again and again and again, and who knows? I mean, some of the stories I've heard would curl your hair about what mothers have done to sons or daughters, and fathers have done to sons or daughters or each other. How many times does that sort of thing get reinforced? And so here someone stands, the mind taking that unresolved pain and putting it into its brain's image of whatever's going on in the world. For the woman we did this worksheet with, it was the situation that she was living in that separated her from the truth of who she was. And to remember that whatever the trauma is that the mind is serving up, whatever the beliefs are that you put between you yourself and the experience of yourself as love, the truth of you as love is still present, even if it's obscured. And there's only one way that I know of, and I've looked everywhere through everything for better than a half a century now. How do you weaken the lies of the mind that obscure the truth that is eternally present in your life? And that is that you are made in the image and likeness of love. Your nature is love, and the experience of yourself as love can never be destroyed. Made obscure? Yes. Made obscure by beliefs? Yes. And made obscure by experiences? Yes. That resonate those beliefs. But that forgiveness, that first century Aramaic technology, is available so that whatever the story you've told yourself, whatever the lie you've told yourself about how that is the cause of this, me not experiencing myself as love, the reason why I'm in pain instead of the bliss and joy of being a created human being, that what forgiveness does is it, if used consistently and persistently, it weakens the energetic patterns that in some cases are so deeply embedded, have been going on for so many generations that it seems impossible that anything other than they're to blame for what's going on inside of me could possibly be true. They are the reason I'm not experiencing myself as love, as a human being. And there is no one that can stop you from experiencing yourself as who you are. No one. But if you've got 1,000 generations of little boys or little girls who said things to their mothers or their fathers or their sisters or their brothers or their lovers or their friends or their enemies, I love you, please don't beat me. The work of forgiveness, consistently, persistently applied, will weaken that so that the breakthrough to the full experience, the full active presence of yourself as love becomes more and more easily available. And when you have that monumental moment where that opening occurs and you experience yourself as that, everything else is a joke. Every pain, every trauma, everything the ego tries to offer is silliness. Now, in that moment, it's silliness. Not in the moment where you're stuck in the ego self, in those thought disorders that have been put between yourself and the truth of who you are. And the structure of the non-being mind, the structure of the non-being self has been going on for so long and is so huge as to be an almost impossible task to achieve its experience. When Yeshua talked about it, he said, the way is narrow. Few are those who will find it. They talked about the way to perdition, the way to hostility, fear, blame. It's all somebody else's fault. The way to just living in that world. Man, that's a wide open gateway. The whole world's doing it. It is the state of the world. It is the one world religion, universal religion of blame. The pathway to so weakening those frequencies of the mind that you can disconnect from them totally and be in the experience of yourself as the human presence of love. Is a gift that one tastes, at least initially, rarely in doing their work. Once you have that taste, It will always be there as a beacon. You'll never be able to so sincerely fool yourself again that what's going on for you is somebody else's fault. Oh, yes, your mind will come up and give you all those foolish ideas, and you'll fall into them. I fall into them. I'm not talking about anybody but myself here. It's all of us. We're all stuck in the same game. But those moments where you fully, completely experience yourself as the presence of love, and then move forward with that experience until it becomes your norm. There's a statement in the scriptures that talks about, as I become less, he becomes more. And, that's all been twisted to be about this man named Yeshua. But what's being spoken of there is as these false ideas that we placed between ourselves as love and the perceptual mind, as those false ideas become less, I'm able to step more and more into this experience of myself as my created essence love, and bring that back to my mind, and bring that back to my mind, and bring that back to my mind with full awareness and full knowledge. That's the work. And the progress is that the way that you can tell you're making progress is you'll have those moments where you taste that full-blown experience. And then the next time you get trapped in your mind and you're in the middle of your muddle, you'll be able to stop and take a breath. You may not be able to fully disconnect from the muddle that's going on, that needs to be processed through, that needs to be forgiven. But you'll be able to take a breath and remember what it was like, and remember the truth that you are the full-blown presence of love, and that's what you're designed to experience. And yes, there's still a mind structure in you, one that's 1,000 generations old, that says, no, come be with this trauma. Come be with this blame. We've got a thought to place between you as the presence of love. We've got a thought to place between you as that experience in the world. And here it is. They did it to you. It's their fault. You're not worthy. The 1,000 thought disorders that go, that Michael's so beautifully describing here. And how deeply urgent to the experience of yourself as love is both forgiveness and the breath. Because as this passage from the Course says, truth is not absent here, just obscured. So the question becomes, are you interested in looking at the world another way? And if you get the chance to watch this video, we don't have it yet. As soon as we've got it, it'll be on our YouTube channel, and it'll be yesterday's date for the Hear My Voice book club. And just be aware as you watch it, and watch this woman as she describes her trauma and her upset, and it's just an all-consuming disturbance. And then watch the moment where she taps into, she changes her thinking and goes from depressed and burdened and traumatized in her looks to where her countenance shifts to just full-blown light. The only thing that changed was a thought. Truth, the truth of who you are as love, is always available to you. And if there are thought disorders you've used to obscure it, it's time to forgive those thought disorders. And that's the essence of this work. That's what we're here to do. And the thought can be a thought about, I have a fear for, my mother, my father, someplace in the world, something. That's a thought disorder that prohibits you from experiencing yourself as love. Forgive it. It might be the thought of blame. It might be how terrible somebody is, the terrible things that have been done. And yes, there are many, many terrible things that have been done. But you can stand as love and be aware of those terrible things and bring your being, love, to those terrible things, and therefore facilitate the healing of those things. Because the bottom line of healing, and for me this goes back, I'm not even sure how many years, 30-some years ago, we're doing an intensive at Heartland. And I don't know, we had 40 or 50 people in the room. And one person was in a major trauma. And we did some significant work with that person, and all of a sudden they just went to this, very much like happened yesterday in the worksheet I was describing. They just went to this place of total connectedness to love and bliss from really horrific trauma. I don't even remember at this moment what the trauma was about, but went from that trauma to just totally blissed and connected. And what, I'm in the process at this point of learning, as I still am, but at that point, some fairly primitive learning about healing. And I watched this person make the shift, and there are, 40, rather 50 other people in the room, and they're all still in the same state. And this person makes such a dramatic shift. It's like, what happened? Why did that happen? How come that happened to them? And everybody else didn't make the same shift. I'm trying to understand what's the bottom line of this healing process. And what I was shown is that in order for healing to occur, two things have to happen. And again, it's all explained in this one little sentence that I've read from the Course. There is another way of looking at the world, and what is it? What I was shown is that two things had to occur for healing to happen. The truth of who you are as love has to show up. And I'm not talking about the world's definitions of love as sexual athletics or, putting your head on a chopping block so somebody else can take advantage of you and call that love. Or I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the fact of you or I as a human being, as active present love, coming into full expression and experience in this moment. That's one practice. That's one thing that has to happen. And then the other piece is that one of those ideas you've placed between yourself and your experience of yourself as love has to come to the surface. The root of it, the hidden part of it, has to come to the surface. Let's say for this young man who I spoke about, who was 3 and said, "Mom, I love you, please don't beat me." He's conning his mom in order not to be beaten. Maybe he's 50 years of age. And he's in the trauma of that. He has no idea why his underlying life is one of depression and rage and grief and pain. He has no idea why it's there, what's going on. He's never looked back on that experience of the child of 3 and the 1,000 other experiences that reinforced it and the 1,000 generations that went before it of abuse. But he comes to a moment where he applies forgiveness. He brings himself into the awareness of himself as active present love. He cancels the goal that's driving his perception to use that experience of the child of 3 that's terrified of being beaten again. He cancels the goal in his mind that's 50 years of age in that moment. And his perception based in that underlying unconscious hidden pain of the 3-year-old collapses, and this is the genius of Yeshua's forgiveness, by canceling a goal, that current moment pained perception collapses in on itself, and it gives you access to the underlying root of the trauma. There's nothing else I know of that can do that for you. Yeah, you might accidentally fall across it and have a healing experience. There's nothing else I know of that will collapse that whole structure of the mind based in that child of 3 and their pain and their need to con mom so that they don't get beaten again. This guy's 50. He cancels the goal. That whole moment of pain perception that seems to be about something going on in his life today collapses in on itself, and all of a sudden he takes a breath and he's back in the memory of sitting in that cart. And the core terror of being beaten surfaces in the presence of active love. Whether it's his active love or whether it's yours, you may be the one holding the space. In the ancient teachings, touching into that active presence of love was called, in one particular case we're aware of, where a woman who has this 12-year issue of blood says, I just know if I can touch the hem of his garment. She's doing her work. She's ready to process whatever this underlying stuff is. And she knows if she can touch into the active presence of love that Yeshua is so practiced at healing, that she will heal. And her willingness to allow that underlying trauma to come forward instantly removes from her physiology, instantly changes her physiology, so that an extremely traumatic experience of a 12-year period disappears in an instant. Why is that such a trauma? Well, aside, of course, I'm not a woman, but I can imagine, I can imagine the inconvenience of that. But beyond that, here's a woman that is not even allowed, under the rule of the day, not even allowed to go into her own kitchen to prepare food for her family. So she's like, she's person non grata. And this man holds the space of active love. You could be that man who holds, or that woman that holds the space of active love, and someone touches the hem of your garment. And because they're ready to collapse their perception at the moment based in maybe a 10-generational trauma, bang, up it comes. And the presence of your love shines a light that transmutes that experience, and that person's freed of that idea that they placed between themselves as love and the experience of the moment. There's skills to be acquired. There's a work to be done. I don't care what it is that you need to heal. Whatever your mind's telling you that's based in pain, and the cause of the pain is out there, your mind is a liar. It's telling you a lie. Total, complete fraud. It is telling you a lie. Perception is a lie meant to block you from experiencing yourself as love. Collapse that lie in the presence of active love, your own or someone else's. And the lie and all of its effects will disappear. Yeshua taught of a power that resided in each of us that in Aramaic was called Ruka Dukudsha, a feminine elemental force that undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. What ideas, if you're in pain, if you're in trauma at any given moment, what ideas do you need to allow to come up from your unconscious in the place of active present love in order to be freed of that construct, so that the truth of you as the presence of love that was there but obscured all of a sudden becomes a present moment experience. The Course refers to that and says, There is no place so holy upon the earth as the place where an ancient hatred becomes a present love. Do you suppose our little boy that had that experience at the door of that grocery store when he was 3 and now he's 50? Do you suppose all the expressions of that trauma that played out from his unconscious played out in his childhood experiences, in his dating experiences, in his marriage or marriages, in his job, in his spiritual? Do you suppose the moment where that ancient hatred is transformed by a present love is something that's just going to happen if he doesn't choose to do the work of developing the skills, that like someday it's just going to kind of accidentally out of the blue happen? Or do you suppose it's going to take a conscious, consistent, persistent effort? I will offer it is the conscious, consistent, persistent effort, and in particular, the application of the tool of forgiveness. If you're not using that tool, go to your app store on your phone, type in the words Heartland, Heartland, one word, Aramaic, Aramaic, forgiveness. You'll be looking at the world's only forgiveness app. Download it on your phone, put it to work. It's specifically designed to be a totally, completely private app. It's so private that we only ask for one permission. We purposely designed it that way, knowing that people would have very tender, private, traumatic things to share with the app. So we specifically designed it. You know, when the developer was doing the work on it, the question was asked, well, how you want to be able to access this? No. Because all you need are these permissions and you'll be able to look at that. No, we don't want that. We want this private. So one permission is asked and one permission is only in the app. It was specifically designed so it would be private for each person that uses it. And that permission is simply have to be able to use the internet in order for the app to work. Once you've done the forgiveness work with the app, it will ask one more permission if you choose to keep your worksheet, to print it. In order to print it, it's got to save it somewhere. So there'll be a question asked is, permission to save it to your drive. But that will only be for you. That will only be to you. There are no other permissions. We're not interested in using your dialer or making phone calls or changing settings or sending texts or reading anything. We're interested in privacy. Go to your website, your app store, Heartland Aramaic Forgiveness, download the app and start to use it. And as you develop the brain cells, there will be questions, probably many questions. I worked purposely, consciously on this worksheet for 30 plus years before I really came to understand it and can really fully explain it. So yes, there will probably be many questions. There's a spot in the app, Jeannie put in there, that anytime you have a question, the most subtle or the most, the biggest question, just any page in the app, you can push a button and ask your question and send it to us. Jeannie will read it on the radio show. We'll answer it and send you back a link. It says, here's where the answer is to your question. So use the app, and or you can go to the website, whyagain.org. In the upper left-hand corner of the website, click Start Here. And that will walk you right through everything we know about it. And it will become, I won't say an easy thing, an easier thing to do, to move from looking at the world through the lens. Paul's talked about we see as though through a glass darkly, to look through the mind perception darkly through the past traumas and fears, the generational patterns. that obscure the presence of yourself, the awareness of yourself as love. And the truth of who you are as love will show up more and more and more in your life, and that's our objective here. The single purpose of this work. And we're honored and delighted that you're here with us to share this space. I sincerely hope you have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. The world is in desperate need of it, and you have the power to give it. Thanks for joining us, and blessings.